Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be reviewing Voigtlander's new 28mm Ultron Spherical version 2. Let me start off by saying that it's actually pretty dope and exciting to be one of the first people on YouTube, at least, to be reviewing something as new as this lens. I've never, ever been close to being the first person to review camera gear nowadays, so this is going to be very exciting. If you've been desperately looking for a review on this new lens and your first impression is already like, I could wait for Ben Heish, I wouldn't blame you at all. Ben Heish is a pretty good camera reviewer. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you support the direction that this channel is going on, because we're going to be focusing more on film photography, concepts, gear, and all this other stuff. I will be teaching some composition here and there as well. And comment down below if you are a fan of this facial hair that I'm growing, or you can comment shave the damn thing off, so let me know there. But without further ado, let's talk about this beautiful new lens that Voigtlander has created for us. The first impressions I had upon unboxing this lens was that it is absolutely tiny. This is the most nimble setup I've ever owned in my life in terms of cameras. The combination of my M6 and this lens is super unobtrusive. It's incredibly light. I could throw it in my bag. I could even hold it in my pocket right now and just pull it out. When I'm out doing my personal street photography work, this is like not bothering me and not distracting me from my process at all. Although I do wish that the front ring on this lens was black to go with the more stealth look. The silver chrome kind of sticks out, but that's just me being nitpicky. For those of you who are shopping for this lens, I believe there are different colorways of this lens. I think there's a full silver chrome and there might be another one. I totally forgot, but I went for this one because it was the most blacked out version, even though it's not completely blacked out. The build quality is very nice. It's an incredibly solid lens. It has a nice little like heft to it, and obviously not hefty enough to pull the camera forward. It's nice and clicky on the aperture, although it's a little bit loose in my opinion, where you can actually bump it from f4 to f5.6 pretty dang easily, so watch out for that. Or maybe it's just my clumsiness whenever I'm like walking about and about. The focus ring is pretty smooth as well. It's not too loose, it's not too firm. It's quick enough for me to snap focus whenever I'm trying to capture a candid moment, whether I'm out with my friends or out in Chinatown or wherever. It's smooth enough to focus really fast. If you're unfamiliar with Voigtlander's lineup of lenses, they did actually have a 28mm lens before this one, and it was still called the Ultron. It's just not the spherical lens formula. So the main differences that I can tell from just owning this, I never owned the original Ultron, but I know that this one is definitely smaller. The original one had some viewfinder blockage, and in the 28mm frame lines, it would be nice to not have viewfinder blockage, because like when you're like looking through the viewfinder, if that like thing is popping out in the corner, then it's kind of annoying. I can safely and gladly tell you that this lens has little to no viewfinder blockage at all. I will show you some footage right here of what it looks like in the Leica M6 0.72 magnification viewfinder. That thing does not really intersect or get in the way of the frame lines at all, and that is super awesome, because again, if you're shooting something that's really fast-paced or just using any camera tool at all, you don't want the gear to get in the way. You just want it to help you connect and assist with the scene around you so that you could better photograph the moment. And this lens does just that. Alright, enough about the looks and the build quality of the lens, because Voigtlander seriously delivered on it. I'm most happiest about the fact that it doesn't block the viewfinder. So, good job, Voigtlander. But let's move on to the image quality, because that's obviously the more important part in picture taking. This lens is super duper sharp. You're never going to complain about that at all when you nail that focus. At f2, it's perfectly sharp. At f5.6, it's sharp, and same for f8 and above. The bokeh rendition is super cool. It's really swirly when you're shooting wide open. It has a nice little character to that. But I will have to say, and you've probably already noticed in the sample images, is that the vignetting is pretty noticeable, especially at f2. And that might bum some people out, especially for those who love to shoot wide open. I mean, if you're going to look for a lens like this, you're probably either shooting in low light or you really love shallow depth of field. but the vignetting, there's no denying it. It's pretty noticeable. The vignetting is digestible at f2.8 and f4, but it's virtually gone by f5.6 and definitely gone at f8. But back to the positives of this lens, it actually does super well with flaring. There's really like no interference with that. It doesn't pollute the entire frame. It doesn't like throw chromatic aberration all up in your face like a box of Cheerios. The distortion is pretty much non-existent, so that's super cool too. Even though I've never owned the original 28mm Ultron from Voigtlander, you could check out Ben Heisch's video on that if you really want full details of that. I'll link it right here. But from what I've heard, the corner sharpness and the image quality is pretty bad on that lens, depending on like who you are. Obviously, if you're a pixel peeper, you're probably gonna hate the original Voigtlander lens. For this, I mean, corner sharpness, I don't really like pay attention to that, and I guess like in the film photography world, we just call that character. But if I'm gonna try to empathize with the pixel peepers for just a second, I would say that the corner sharpness is like, it's pretty good. I think it's fine, to be honest. There is like a little bit of fall off, but it kind of adds to like a nice natural softness. Not too clinical, but if you want absolutely clinical sharpness and you got the dough, then go for the Leica 28mm Summicron. And if you don't know what the price tag is, Google it right now, come back to this video and be glad that this lens is as affordable as it is and as good as it is. If I'm going to give this an honest, opinionated score of how this image quality holds up, I would say 8.9 out of 10. I would only say 8.9 is because that vignetting kind of does bug me when I'm in low light situations, and that f2 really kind of like takes up a third of my image, or it feels like it takes up a third. So that kind of sucks, but I'm hardly ever shooting in low light situations with film in general. But I get it, we can't really change our ISO like we can on digital cameras. Once we load in Porsche 400, we're kind of like capped at a 400 ISO, and having a very competent f2 aperture or a faster aperture in general, it would be very helpful if it didn't vignette as heavily as it did on this lens. But we don't live in an ideal world, and this lens is also dramatically cheaper than the Leica 28mm Summicron, so you kind of get what you pay for, but you're also getting a lot for what you pay for out of this lens. All right, so I personally think that this is a very important topic to talk about. 35mm focal length versus 28mm focal length. I am a huge 35mm focal length guy. That's my favorite focal length to work with. The lens that I'm using right now is a 35mm prime. When I was on my old Nikon digital setup, the 35mm lens was glued to my body and never really left. And same goes for my film setup. I concentrate on maxing out the quality of my 35mm lens. I'll make a video on that very soon. But if you're unfamiliar with the 28mm focal length, which I kind of feel most of us are because most camera manufacturers don't make 28mm lenses, or at least push them out into the forefront. One description that I can give you is like, if you were shooting 35mm and you wanted a little bit more room for context, then the 28 is perfect. It's the kind of like the happy medium, in my opinion, of the 24 and the 35, because it does give you like a wider perspective, and it doesn't really like compromise the reality or the authenticity of the image by like giving you like a dramatic, distorted field of view that 24 can sometimes give you. And you can still get in pretty close and crop just a tiny little bit on these 28mm images so that you can kind of get that 35mm look. But for me personally, there was a little bit of a learning curve to getting more comfortable with this new field of view, because I've used 35mm lenses and 24 for like my wedding work, like back in the day. This newer focal length to me didn't give me that much height, but the width was just new and awkward enough for it to like throw off all of my compositions. Like my frames would start cutting off limbs on accident. I would forget to like include some detail in the frame. It was just really weird. But I will have to say that the 28mm field of view is perfect for street photography for me because of the zone focusing capabilities, and also the ability to include a lot of context and giving more purpose into the framing. I'll make a video about this, so I won't go too in depth with it, but 28 to 35 is just far enough for you to like really consider like, which lens should I get? And if I were to give like kind of like an opinionated suggestion, recommendation on it, I would say that if you're more of like a more slowed down person, photographing more slowed down things, like maybe a family gathering where not too many people are running around, or portraiture, I would recommend the 35mm, and that's solely based on my own experience. You could definitely do that with the 28, and I would personally, again, very opinionated, recommend the 28 if you're capturing more like fast action stuff where you need like that extra field of view to capture action in very candid moments, or you simply just want more context that the 35mm focal length can't give you. So the final verdict is whether I would recommend this lens to anybody. And if you can't tell, and if you reached this part of the video, I would definitely highly recommend this Voigtlander 28mm Ultron spherical version 2 lens to anybody. You would definitely get a huge bang for your buck. If you're not really shooting at f2 or wide open on any like film photography gear, then you're going to love this lens, especially if you shoot at f5.6 like I do. But if money wasn't a factor for you and you're in the market for a 28mm lens, I would say the Leica 28mm Summicron, then the Leica 28mm Elmerit, a spherical version, not the non-spherical version that I owned. And then I would say this Voigtlander 28mm spherical. But if money wasn't a factor, that would be my ranking. Thank you guys so much for watching through the end of this video. I really love this little guy in my arsenal of lenses. It's great for the way that I use it, and I hope that you can create some great work with it if you choose to purchase it as well. Voigtlander, I hope you're watching this. Maybe we could partner on some future videos. But make sure you like this video and subscribe for more, and leave a comment down below on what you think about the whole like Leica lenses only or shopping for alternatives like Voigtlanders and other brands. And what do you think about the 28mm focal length? I would love to hear what you have to say. But thank you guys and girls for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.